So here we have a text data mapping configuration, and we have the text data source inside of the viewer. Since we've already set our boundaries, we have the proper number of records. So all we need to do now is to extract the data from the source record into our extracted record. There are two different ways to extract data from multiple lines inside of a text data source. The first is to simply select multiple lines and to extract it directly as a single line of text. Now, if you do this, what happens is that each line inside of the source record will be added to the field separated by a line return. So if you were to use this field directly inside of a template, it would actually appear as multiple lines inside of that record. However, what we normally want to do is to use each line separately because we want to, say, display the phone number or the email in a different location than the address block. In order to do that, we can simply split the single extract field into multiple fields, one for each line. Now, when you split the field in a text data file, it is not undoable. Basically, it will create individual fields that cannot be merged again. Now, right now in my extracted data, there's a couple of things that we need to fix. First of all, the field names are very generic. We can rename the fields simply by using the rename and order field dialog, which is in the step properties for the extraction. Using the magic of editing, I've changed all the field names here. The other thing we want to do is to remove any field that doesn't have any data. So basically empty lines that appear inside of the data. We can simply do that by clicking on them and deleting them. Another thing that we can do is to rename the extract step into something that's a bit more relevant to what we're extracting. We can do that in two ways. The first way is to simply rename it directly in the steps pane just by clicking on the title. Or you can change it in the description section of the step properties. You can also add a comment to add a bit more details to what you're doing in that. Now, another way to extract fields is to do it line by line. Now, here's a very useful tip. When you have a data selection in your data source and you extract data with it or create a condition or whatever, the data selection itself remains present. It doesn't disappear. So what you can do is something like this. Select the first line of data you want to extract, and then hit Add Extract Field. Move the selection to the second line, and Add Extract Field again. Now, by the way, you can also do that using a right click or using F10. Now, one important detail. As you may have realized, the first time I did the extraction, I used the Add Extract step, which created a new step. But the invoice information at the top right, I actually use the Add Extract Field button. What's the difference between the two? Well, if you already have an existing extract step at the level where you want to extract, so here at the beginning of my file, before any loop or anything else, it is better to add fields to the existing step rather than to add a new step for each field. This is because of performance. The less steps you have inside of your process, the faster and the more optimized it will be. All right, what we have now is basically promotional information. We have an address, we have a name, phone number, email, but because what we want to do is to show you how to extract everything, we're now going to extract those line items or the line details. The first thing we need to do is to tell the data mapper module where to start extracting. In order to do that, we select the first line of the line items or the detail lines, and we add the go-to step. Now, it doesn't matter what area I select on the line as long as I'm within the line. Now, the go-to step is actually pretty versatile. Here, all it does is it goes from the start of the page to a static position, which is always the same, whatever my record, my source record. Because I know that this is static, or that it's always at the same place, I can do this. In more complex data files, the go-to might be a bit different, or you might have to use loops and everything. But the go-to can also be used in other places, and we'll see it in a second after adding the loop. Now, speaking of the loop itself, when you create a loop, you have to think about how that loop is going to end. The best way to do it, if your data file permits, is to select something that appears right after the last line of your details. So here we have the subtotals. All we need to do is to select it and then add the loop. Now within the repeat step, we have another go-to step. That go-to step simply skips to the next available line for each of the loops. So it loops on every line until the subtotals line. Now, a repeat step can actually be a bit more than just for each line. Here what we have is until statement is true. So until subtotals appears on this specific position. We could also have different conditions, combined conditions, but this will be viewed in an advanced animation. Okay, so we have our loop. The next step that we need to do is to extract the information. Now, because we're within a loop, any data that we extract will be extracted in a detail table. Let me show you how that works. So in our data model pane, a new thing appears, which is the detail. Now that detail table can contain multiple entries. So when it's within a loop, it has as many items within the detail table as you have iterations of the loop. So we have 10 line items in our source record. We have 10 lines in our detail table. If we go to the next one, we can see that it corresponds to the item number on the left. Now also note that switching between detail lines doesn't change the record. It is only within that specific record that you have multiple detail lines. If I switch to another record, we'll see that it has more detail lines. So let me extract the rest of the information on this line. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the line details are extracted, and I've taken the liberty to give them proper names inside of my data model. Now all our line items are extracted, and I also took the liberty of renaming the fields inside of the data model. Now there's only one last thing that we need to extract, and it's the subtotal, taxes, and total at the end of the line items. The beauty of how this specific text file, which is kind of standard, is built, is that the totals and taxes always appear right after the last detail line. Now, when the loop appears, or when the loop executes, the goto will ensure that the selection or the current active line is always the one where it's extracting. So when it gets to the end of the repeat, it will be at the selection, which is the last detail line, always. So if we select the subtotals, and once my selection is done, I can simply add it to my record. Make sure we're actually at the end of the repeat, so after the repeat by selecting it, and then hitting extract. Why can't we add it to the customer information extract step? Because the cursor is at the end of the last detail line, the extraction will be relative to where the cursor was. So it's extracting the next 3 lines. That's why we have it at the end after the repeat. Now, as far as the first source record is concerned, the extraction is perfect and working. But let's take a look at the second record to verify that everything is working as intended. And here what we realize is, if I select my extraction here, that I'm actually extracting data between the pages. So I'm extracting the footer of one page and the header of the other one. I'm getting data I don't really want. And if I skip through the detail lines, we now see clearly that this is information we don't want. We have a lot more detail lines than we should. So how do we fix this? Well, basically, we need to add a condition step. So the condition step is something that will give you true or false depending on a condition. How do we determine it? Well, we need the condition to become true whenever we are on a detail line, which means we need to find something that is specific to the detail lines only within the loop. There's obviously a couple of things that we could try to do, but I would say the easiest one is to find the dot on the total for the line item and make a condition on that. So let's do that. But how do I make a condition on the dot if I already have a selection? If I try to click on it, it'll actually move the selection and thus change the way my data is extracted. There's a small little tip for that. On the top of the data viewer, there is a very useful icon that's called lock. When you click on lock extracted data, you can still see that the data is there, and if you select something else, it'll still select the appropriate fields. However, you can't change the selections by clicking and dragging them inside of the data viewer. What this will do is just always create a new data selection. So if I select on my dot, I'm ready to create my condition. Again, I need to select where I want to insert the condition right after the currently selected step, and then I create it. So now we see a visual change in the viewer. We see that any line within the loop that has the dot at the total will appear in green and have a green check mark on the left, whereas any line that doesn't happen to be a detail line appears in red. Now we still are extracting outside of the condition, so we still have our extra detail lines in the actual extraction, but all we need to do now is to drag the extraction step inside of the condition, and our problem is solved. We now only have 25 detail lines, which is the number that we want. And our extraction process is complete and functional for every single one of our records. So that's it for extracting transactional data from a text data file from A to Z using pretty much all of the steps inside of the Data Mapper module.